I'm your host, Eric Eisenberg. Welcome to Hero Blend number 14. This week we're answering questions all about Spider-Man's long history both in the comics and on the big screen, so stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. Once again, I am joined by creative director of Cinema Blend, Mack Rawden. How's it going, man?
It's going well. How about yourself?
It's been great, man. We got Amazing Spider-Man 2 coming out next week, which I'm very excited about, and is also the reason why you are here.
I do. I have some questions once again.
Yep. If you remember back in episode 7, Mack joined us. He's not the biggest guy on comic book movies or comic books in general, so he's kind of the representation of the non-comic book literate crowd that might be watching this video. So he's going to ask me a few questions about Spider-Man today.
You may be too embarrassed to ask these questions, but I'm not.
He is not. He knows nothing about it, so bring it. What's your first question, man?
Here we go. Alright, so Spider-Man is a Marvel character,
yes.
Right? Why is he not in the Avengers?
Why is he not in the Avengers? Okay, that is basically what that is. A bunch of years ago, Marvel Studios didn't exist, but at the same time, people were very interested in making movies based on their characters. Like, this is like back, even in the 90s, James Cameron was thinking about making a Spider-Man movie. But at the time, obviously, Marvel wasn't making their own movies, so they sold the licenses to their characters. Spider-Man ended up going to Sony, which is where it's been ever since. Unfortunately, because Sony holds onto the rights of Spider-Man and everyone in the Spider-Man comic/universe, they cannot interact with the Marvel Studios characters, which are under Marvel's licenses. So basically what it is Sony is unwilling to dilute their brand, as it were, by mixing in Spider-Man with what Marvel's been doing. So, yeah, it's basically because even though everyone would want to see it, studios are stubborn.
So hypothetically, though, we could get this at some point.
If there has been said that even in the early stages of Avengers, there was talk about potentially adding the Oscorp Tower, which is Norman Osborn's company, to the New York skyline, which during the Avengers would have been a fairly big deal, because it does kind of suggest that Spider-Man is in there somewhere. They ended up not being able to do that because they couldn't work out the deal in time for the movie to be finished. But it's a sign in a possibly good direction for that idea. Never say never. I mean, maybe Sony or Marvel will one day be desperate enough to be like, please join us, and they'll get the even better comic book movie than we've already seen. So, what's your next question, bud?
Sweet. All right. Okay.
Okay.
So this one, my wife said is the dumbest question I've ever gotten.
Okay.
But I think it's a good one. All right. I think you're going to want to know, too. All right. So, Harry Osborn, right? Yeah. He is a rich guy that's friends with Spider-Man,
sure.
But also he has like a alter ego, and he's Spider-Man's enemy.
He does eventually become a New Goblin, or
sorry, spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry.
But if I know that, I think you know that, right? Okay, so Lex Luthor is a rich guy, who's friends with Superman,
right?
He also is really Superman's enemy, right? So are these characters as similar as they seem from that little snapshot?
You know, that is like, I will say that's kind of it's a broad cover, and it's an interesting comparison to make, especially considering that Goblin is a very important villain in Spider-Man's legacy. I mean, especially Norman, but also Harry. The big difference between Harry and Lex Luthor is probably intelligence. I mean, basically, if we're keeping kind of focused on Spider-Man, Harry Osborn kind of has always lived in the shadow of his father. He's never been able to live up to his father's expectations, and instead of kind of trying to be the best he could be, in the comics he's actually more of a kind of loser. He drugs out a lot, he overdoses, because he basically can't stand up to the pressures that his father put on him. Lex, meanwhile, is basically a super genius who does have that previous relationship with Superman, but is able to do a little bit more with it. I mean, eventually, Harry does, as seen in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, Harry does become vengeful against Spider-Man for killing his father, and does don the Goblin suit himself, become a villain, but different trajectories.
Okay.
So, different trajectories.
Okay, alright, moving on.
Right.
Okay, so you just referenced the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, right? Okay, so I know that they made a lot of money. A lot of money,
yep. Spider-Man 3 is even the most
I know that Spider-Man 3, some people, specifically Ebert, called like the best superhero movie ever.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but
people were very, very.
They were somewhat mixed on Spider-Man 3. The reaction since has not been so positive, but
Okay, at the time it came out, there was a lot of people who thought it was a masterwork.
There were people applauding it,
and some of the earlier movies, especially, people were all over as well.
Absolutely, Spider-Man 1 and 2, I still stay are some of the best comic book movies.
And they made a lot of money.
Made a ton of money. Spider-Man 3 made the most amount of money.
So why was Sam Raimi told not to make more movies, or did he tell them I don't want to make more movies?
That's kind of a mix of both. Basically, what it was in when they were making Spider-Man 3. This is the way the legend goes. This is the story that's out there. Sam Raimi wanted Spider-Man 3 to have Sandman as the principal villain. He's in the movie, but Sony really wanted Venom to be in the movie also because he's basically a fan favorite villain. Like, he really wanted to introduce him into the movies. Unfortunately, as we've seen in Spider-Man 3, there really isn't enough time in that film for both villains. Fortunately, they were kind of both jammed in there anyway. That caused a lot of tension between Sam Raimi and the people at Sony. So when Spider-Man 4 came along, and it got to a pretty significant place. They had like a script. I think it was... I think James Vanderbilt was writing it. I'm not 100% on that. But like John Malkovich was on board to play Vulture. There was talks about Anne Hathaway. This is like pre-Dark Knight Rises, playing a a new villain called Vulture S. But eventually,
Vulture S.
Yes, Vulture S. It's not a joke.
Okay.
Whether that would have actually turned out, I don't know. Point decided. Eventually, Sam Raimi and Sony, they had very differing visions of what to do with this franchise. They weren't too big on the idea of having John Malkovich, an older guy, playing a villain. Eventually, Sam Raimi walked away from the project. Not too happy, and as a result, we got Amazing Spider-Man. So that's why we don't have Amazing Spider-Man 4, and why next week we will have Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yay, question mark. Okay, alright. So... in all the versions that I've seen of Spider-Man, or at least that I can remember, he's like teenager or like early 20-something, or are there alternate arcs that I don't know about where he gets old? Or
well, honestly, the thing about Spider-Man is that one of the reasons why he was created by Stan Lee was because back in like the 60s, there really weren't any kid superheroes. They were all adults established in the Marvel Universe. And I mean, it's still pretty much the same way. You see mostly adult superheroes. So Spider-Man was really created by Stan Lee because he was giving an opportunity for the younger audiences, which were the ones reading the comics, to kind of like see their way into a hero's point of view. So, like, basically, there are some versions of Spider-Man where he's a little bit older, he does age a little bit, but for the most part, he's pretty much only been kept as kind of a young guy, simply because of that origin story and kind of the desire to have a young perspective against all these older heroes in the Marvel Universe. So, that explains that.
Interesting. Okay. Okay, alright. Alright, so if you think of superheroes on, like, a spectrum,
sure,
right? Okay. And so let's say, like, on the one end of the spectrum, you have Superman, who's, like,
super wholesome,
really lofty ideals. He doesn't jaywalk, right? Okay. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you got somebody like the comedian, that will do anything for what he sees as right in
his version of justice. Sure,
right? Okay. So if you were to put Spider-Man on that spectrum somewhere, who's he closer to?
Definitely a lot closer to Spider-Man. Superman. Spider-Man, again, is not he's not a hero who kills. He goes out of his way not to. He has accidentally caused the death of people over the years. One of them being Gwen Stacy. Possible spoiler for Amazing Spider-Man 2. I have no idea. But basically, most Spider-Man villains live. They go to either Rikers Island, which is spelled with a Y and is Marvel Universe's version of the real New York prison, Rikers Island, or they go to the Ravencroft Institute, which is basically like
mentors.
It's basically like what Arkham Asylum is in the Batman universe, which is that they keep all of the cuckoo brains, and we'll actually get to see Ravencroft Institute for the first time in Amazing Spider-Man 2. So. That's something too for the first time, and potentially, and obviously, and one of the reasons why it's kind of nice to have prisons instead of killing off the villains, which is something that Sam Raimi's movies always did, and I wasn't always too happy with. But it keeps villains around. It means that they could potentially break out of prison, and they could form the Sinister Six, which is a supervillain team that come together to defeat Spider-Man because they can't do it by themselves. So basically, that's what it is.
So he's definitely a hero in the White Hat.
Yes, exactly. He will go out of his way not to kill people.
Okay, all right. So then I got that's my normal 5 questions.
Okay.
But then I got bonus 5
bonus
questions to just rapid fire.
Sure, hit me.
Okay, all right. Does Spider-Man use weapons?
Except for he has his web shooters, but and he can. There are like certain comics where he adapts them to like create different like uses, like web shield and yada yada. But for the most part, that's pretty much his thing, web shooters.
Okay, all right. So Superman lives in Metropolis. Batman lives in Gotham. Where does Spider-Man live?
Well, one thing that's different. The difference between DC and Marvel is that there's a lot more real-world settings in Marvel, while DC mostly has fictional ones. Spider-Man is from Queens. He is a Mets fan, which I definitely appreciate. And yeah, he's a native New Yorker. So boom.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Who is the toughest villain in the Spider-Man universe?
Toughest universe. You know, that is definitely arguable. He's, I'd say, amongst the regulars, obviously Green Goblin is kind of one of his biggest adversaries, not only because he has this connection to Norman Osborn, which always kind of holds him back. Venom, I think, is actually another good answer, simply because he's a villain who not only, he knows everything about Spider-Man because the alien symbiote that gives him his powers is not only able to replicate Spider-Man's powers, but also give Eddie Brock, who's in the Venom suit, classically, all of Spider-Man's memories and thoughts, so he knows who Spider-Man is, he knows everyone that he associates with, so he is pretty dangerous. If we're talking in the larger universe, I mean, you could introduce people like Galactus, which is a character who eats universes and worlds. So I mean, he usually needs the help of some other heroes to help him in that battle. But yeah, I'd say that's the spectrum. Okay.
All right. So in the Raimi Spider-Man movies, right? There's a guy who is like an editor and he yells at people.
J. Jonah Jameson. Yes.
Yes. Okay. And people, I remember coming out of that movie, he's one of the like distinct characters that you remember.
Oh yeah, no, I love J.
But I didn't see him in the first movie.
And J.K. Simmons was not in the Amazing, J. Jonah Jameson was not featured in the Amazing Spider-Man. J.K. Simmons was the actor who played him in Sam Raimi's trilogy. Absolutely amazing. Basically, what that is they weren't quick to try and top J.K. Simmons' performance in Raimi's movies, and they didn't obviously want to have him come back because that creates some kind of weird continuity between the two series. So I think what it is basically is they keep him out so that there can create some distance between the Raimi trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but I think eventually we are going to see him back, and probably in like Amazing Spider-Man 3. I think that's even what Mark Webb has said.
Do you think that J.K. Simmons will play him again, or no?
Honestly, I'd really like to see that, but I think there are other alternatives. I actually think Hugh Laurie would make a great alternative. He certainly has experience yelling at people, and I think he'd look good with the mustache. So, yeah.
All right. Last question, and the most important question.
Bring it.
Who is hotter, Mary Jane or Gwen?
Mary Jane or Gwen? Again, arguable amongst fans, but I think if you're going to go classic, and we're talking short, quick answers, Mary Jane has always been kind of a model, classically drawn in the comics. I mean, how many women could get away with stepping up to your doorway and introducing yourself as you hit the jackpot tiger? That's kind of a big deal. So I think in that battle, I think it's got to be Mary Jane. So you got out of questions, man.
That's it.
I guess we'll just have to wait until Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm sure I'll have you on before then, but we'll definitely do this again for Guardians of the Galaxy. Mac, thank you so much for being back, man.
Anytime.
Cool. Have a great week, everyone.